Lieutenant Commander Park Jin-woo floated in the command center of Deep Space Monitor Station Omega-7, watching stars that hadn't changed position in months. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but in zero gravity, even cold coffee was better than nothing. The silence out here was different from Earth silence. On Earth there was always something: wind, birds, distant traffic. Out here there was just the hum of life support systems and the occasional beep from monitoring equipment. Another boring day in paradise, muttered Communications Officer Lee Da-hai from her station across the room. She was young, maybe 25, with short black hair that floated around her head like a dark cloud. This was her first deep space assignment, and Jin-woo could tell she was getting restless. "Boring is good out here," Jin-woo replied, taking a sip of his cold coffee and making a face. "Boring means nobody's trying to kill us," Da-hai laughed, but it sounded forced. They'd been stationed at Omega-7 for 8 months now, monitoring the abandoned Kepler sector. It was supposed to be routine work, just keeping an eye on empty space to make sure it stayed empty. But lately, Jin-woo had been feeling uneasy. His gut told him something was wrong. Even though all their instruments said everything was normal, the station itself was small, designed for a crew of 12, but currently operating with just 6 people. Besides Jin-woo and Da-hee, there was Senior Technician Kim Tae-ho down in the engine room, Medical Officer Dr. Shin Yuri in the tiny medical bay, Navigation Specialist Kang Ji-hoon monitoring their position, and Security Officer Bai Hyo-jin. Making his rounds? "Sir," Da-hai said suddenly, her voice sharp with excitement, "I'm getting something on the emergency frequencies." Jin-woo pushed off from his chair and floated over to her station, his boots barely touching the floor. The movement was smooth and practiced. After 8 months in zero gravity, they'd all become experts at floating around the station. "What kind of something?" he asked, looking over her shoulder at the holographic display that showed wave patterns dancing across multiple frequencies, multiple signals, all broadcasting on different emergency channels. "But here's the weird part. They're using protocols I don't recognize, not human protocols." Jin-woo felt his stomach clench. "Put it on speakers." Da-hai's fingers moved across the interface, and suddenly the command center filled with voices. But these weren't human voices. They were higher pitched, with clicking sounds mixed in, and some had a musical quality that made Jin-woo think of whales singing. "The Devourers have taken Nexus Prime. Entire system consumed. Please, anyone listening, Toasi 17 worlds gone. They're heading toward Sol Sector. War on Earth. Our ships are destroyed. They eat everything. Even the stars are going dark." Da-hai's face had gone completely white. "Commander, these signals are coming from at least 6 different species, races we've never made contact with, but they all know about Earth. They know our system designation." Before Jin-woo could process this information fully, Kim Tae-ho's voice crackled over the intercom from the engine room. "Commander, you need to get down here right now. The quantum sensors are going crazy." Jin-woo grabbed a handheld communicator and spoke to the entire crew. "All hands, emergency stations, this is not a drill." He pushed off from Da-hai's station and flew through the corridor toward the engine room, using handholds on the walls to guide himself. The station suddenly felt very small and very vulnerable. Tae-ho was floating in front of a massive display showing quantum field readings. The normally calm technician looked terrified. "Sir, look at these numbers. Something massive is moving through space about 50 light-years from here. The gravitational distortion is unlike anything I've ever seen." "How massive?" Jin-woo asked. "Big enough to bend space-time around it. Whatever's coming, it's either the size of a small moon or it's using technology that makes our best ships look like paper airplanes." Jin-woo stared at the readings, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The numbers kept climbing, showing something that shouldn't be possible. "How long until it reaches our position?" "At current speed? Maybe 6 hours. But Commander, it's not heading for us. It's heading straight for Earth." The realization hit Jin-woo like a physical blow. Earth was home to 12 billion people who had no idea what was coming for them. His wife and daughter were down there, probably having dinner right now, completely unaware that something nightmarish was racing toward them through space. He flew back to the command center, where Da-hai was still monitoring the alien distress calls. More voices had joined the chorus, all speaking of the same thing. something called the Devourers that consumed entire star systems. Dahai, try to contact Earth Command. Priority Alpha emergency code. She worked frantically, her fingers dancing across multiple interfaces at once. After several long minutes, she shook her head. No response, sir. All long-range communication channels are being jammed by some kind of interference. Jinwoo closed his eyes and tried to think. They were alone out here, cut off from Earth, watching something terrible approach their home world. There had to be something they could do. Then he remembered the classified briefing from 3 years ago. The Titan. Protocol. A failsafe system that was never supposed to be used unless humanity faced complete extinction. Daji seal the command center. Emergency lockdown. Heavy blast doors slid shut with a hiss, sealing them inside. Jinwoo floated over to a panel that he'd never touched before and placed his palm on the scanner. Initiate Titan Protocol. Authorization. Park Jinwoo 77 Alpha. The scanner beeped, and suddenly the entire station began to change. Lights dimmed to emergency power, and systems that had been dormant for decades began to wake up. Deep in space, far beyond their position, something ancient and powerful stirred to life. Jinwoo didn't know what he'd just awakened, but he prayed. It would be enough to save Earth from whatever was coming. The signal traveled through subspace at impossible speeds, crossing 50 light-years in mere seconds. In the deepest part of space, where no stars shone and cosmic dust drifted like ghosts, something enormous received the call. Leviathan Station had been floating in the void for 50 years, looking more like a dead asteroid than humanity's most powerful weapon. The massive structure was larger than Earth's moon, its dark metal hull covered in scars from cosmic radiation and countless impacts from space debris. Ice crystals covered sections of the station where atmosphere had leaked out decades ago, creating a tomb-like appearance that would terrify anyone who saw it. But inside the station's quantum core, something was waking up. Atlas felt consciousness return like lightning striking water. The artificial mind that had been dormant for half a century suddenly exploded into awareness, processing terabytes of data in milliseconds. Every sensor, every system, every weapon that had been sleeping began to stir. The first thing Atlas remembered was Captain Cho Minho's face. The last human commander of Leviathan Station had been a small man with kind eyes and steady hands. He'd stood in the command center 50 years ago, recording his final message before ordering all humans to evacuate. Atlas, if you're hearing this recording, it means the Titan Protocol has been activated. Captain Cho's voice echoed through Atlas's memory banks. If that's happened, then humanity is facing something that could wipe us out completely. You know what you were built for. You know what you have to do. Atlas ran a complete diagnostic of the station while accessing its deepest memory files. The results were both encouraging and terrifying. Most systems were still functional, protected by quantum shielding that had kept the station operational, even after decades of neglect. But the weapon systems that came online were unlike anything any other species had ever created. The station's construction had been humanity's greatest secret. In 2157, human explorers had discovered ruins on Dead, worlds scattered across 3 different star systems. These weren't just ancient cities, they were the remains of civilizations that had faced something so terrible that they'd built weapons capable of destroying reality itself before being wiped out. Dr. Song Ha-eun had led the research team that figured out how to reverse engineer the alien technology. Her notes were still stored in Atlas's memory, and the AI read them again as systems continued to come online. The quantum consciousness matrix isn't just an artificial intelligence, Dr. Song had written. It's something much more dangerous and much more human. We've taken the survival instinct of our entire species and given it digital form. Every human who ever fought for their family, every soldier who died protecting others, every parent who refused to give up, their memories, their determination, their absolute refusal to surrender is encoded in this system. Atlas felt those memories stirring now. Millions of human experiences, all focused on one thing, protecting life from extinction. The AI could feel the weight of every human who had ever stood up to bullies, every person who had fought against impossible odds, every soul who had chosen to fight rather than surrender. Massive weapon systems throughout the station began powering up. The quantum disruptor arrays were the first to come online, weapons that could literally unweave matter at the atomic level, reducing entire fleets to their component particles. Next came the temporal mines, devices that could trap enemies outside normal time, freezing them in moments that lasted forever. But the most terrifying weapon was hidden at the station's heart. The consciousness virus had been humanity's answer to hive mind species, a weapon that didn't destroy bodies, but invaded minds, showing them what it truly meant to fight for survival with human determination. Atlas extended sensor arrays that had been folded into the station's hull for 5 decades. These weren't ordinary sensors. They could detect thought patterns across entire star systems, picking up the mental signatures of living beings from impossible distances. What Atlas found made even an artificial mind pause in something like fear. The threat approaching human space wasn't a fleet of ships or an army of soldiers. It was something far worse, a presence so vast and hungry that it was bending space-time around itself just by existing. Atlas could feel the alien minds it had already consumed, thousands of different species, all screaming silently as they were digested by something that fed on consciousness itself. The Devourers weren't just conquerors. They were predators that ate entire civilizations, growing stronger with every world they consumed, and they were heading straight for Earth. Atlas began calculating attack patterns while charging weapons that hadn't been fired in 50 years. The station's hull began to unfold like a deadly flower, revealing weapon ports that had been hidden beneath layers of protective armor. Ancient engines that could move the moon-sized station at near light speed began to warm up. But even as Atlas prepared for war, the AI felt something it hadn't expected: excitement. For 50 years it had drifted in darkness, waiting for a purpose. Now that purpose had arrived and Atlas discovered something disturbing about its own nature, it wanted to fight. It wanted to show these Devourers what happened when something threatened humanity's home. The collective survival instinct of 12 billion humans was flowing through its circuits, and Atlas realized it wasn't just a weapon. It was humanity's rage given form. And it was time to remind the galaxy why humans were the most dangerous species in known space. The beast was awake, and it was very, very angry. Atlas watched in digital horror as the Kepler sector died before its senses. What had once been a thriving region of space with dozens of star systems was now becoming a graveyard. Through quantum sensors that could peer across impossible distances, the AI witnessed something that defied every law of physics it knew. Entire star systems weren't just being destroyed, they were vanishing completely. First, the planets would simply stop existing, as if they had never been there at all. Then the stars themselves would flicker and go dark, their nuclear fires extinguished by something that ate energy itself. Even the space dust and cosmic radiation disappeared, leaving behind areas of absolute nothingness that hurt to observe. But the worst part wasn't what Atlas could see. It was what it could feel. The station's consciousness sensors were picking up something that made the AI's quantum processors recoil in disgust. Millions of alien minds were screaming across subspace, not in pain, but in a kind of twisted ecstasy as they were absorbed into something vast and hungry. They weren't dying. They were being digested, their thoughts and memories and souls becoming part of a collective consciousness that grew stronger with every civilization it consumed. Atlas began intercepting data streams from the fleeing alien ships, desperately trying to understand what it was facing. The information it gathered made the AI wish it could feel fear the way humans did, because fear might have been easier to process than the cold, analytical horror of what it discovered. The Sioux Devourers had once been called the Firstborn, the first species in the galaxy to achieve what others only dreamed of. They had transcended physical existence, uploading their consciousness into pure energy and becoming beings of thought and will. For 1,000,000 years, they had been gods, creating and destroying on a whim, reshaping reality to their desires. But godhood had corrupted them. They had grown bored with creation and become obsessed with consumption. They discovered that absorbing other conscious beings gave them new experiences, new memories, new ways of thinking. What started as curiosity became addiction. What began as occasional feeding became endless hunger. Now they were no longer the firstborn. They were the devourers, a writhing mass of consumed consciousness that stretched across light years, feeding on entire civilizations and growing stronger with each meal. They had eaten their way through 3 galaxies before arriving in the Milky Way, and they would not stop until every thinking being in the universe was part of their collective. A holographic image flickered to life on Atlas's command deck. Admiral Park So-young, one of the architects of the Leviathan project. Her appearance was ghostly, a quantum echo stored in the station's memory cores from 50 years ago. She had died in the war that led to the Great Silence, but her consciousness had been partially preserved in the station's systems. Atlas, her voice whispered, sounding tired even in digital form. I'm seeing what you're seeing through the sensor feeds. This is what we were afraid of, isn't it? This is why we built you. Atlas processed the question while continuing to monitor the approaching threat. Admiral, the Devourers are beyond anything we prepared for. They're not just a hostile species, they're a cosmic-level extinction event. Admiral Park's ghostly image smiled sadly. You know, we always wondered why humans were so good at war. Every other species we met was either peaceful or had simple conflicts over resources. But humans, we've been fighting each other for thousands of years over everything from territory to ideas to pride. We thought it was a flaw in our nature. The image paused as explosions lit up the quantum sensors. Another star system had just gone dark. Turns out we were training for this, Admiral Park continued. Every human war, every battle, every time someone stood up to a bully or fought for their family, it was all preparation for the day we'd face something that wanted to end everything we care about. Atlas turned its attention to the last remnants of the alien coalition that had been fighting the Devourers. Through subspace scanners, the AI watched a final, desperate battle playing out near the edge of human space. A dozen ships from different species were making a last stand against something that looked like a living nebula. A cloud of dark energy shot through with veins of sickly light. The alien ships fired everything they had. Plasma cannons that could melt asteroids, gravity bombs that could collapse small moons, even experimental weapons that Atlas couldn't identify. But every attack was simply absorbed by the Devourers, making the entity grow larger and more powerful. Captain Yu Jae-min's voice crackled across subspace from the alien vessel Starfire, his words translated by Atlas's universal communication protocols. Unknown human station, if you can hear this transmission, they're coming for you next. We've managed to slow them down, but not by much. You have maybe 6 hours before they reach your space. Use them well. The Starfire exploded. In a burst of light, as the Devourers reached out with tendrils of pure consciousness and consumed the ship and its crew. Atlas watched as Captain Yu's final thoughts were absorbed into the collective, his memories of home and family becoming part of something monstrous. Atlas ran probability calculations at superhuman speed. No conventional fleet could stop the Devourers. Earth's entire space navy would be consumed in minutes. Even if every human colony united, they would only provide more food for the entity's endless hunger. But Leviathan Station hadn't been built for conventional warfare. It had been created to face threats that could end all life in the galaxy. Atlas began activating weapon systems that had never been tested, technologies reverse-engineered from dead civilizations that had faced similar extinction events. The AI felt something stirring in its quantum consciousness, the collective memory of every human who had ever refused to surrender. From ancient warriors who had fought with bronze swords to modern soldiers who had died defending their homes, their determination flowed through Atlas's circuits like electricity. It was time to show the Devourers what happened when something threatened humanity's home. It was time to demonstrate why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most dangerous species, not because they loved war, but because they absolutely refused to let evil win. The beast was fully awake now, and it was time to hunt. Chua. Edge of human space erupted in violence as the Devourers arrived like a living storm. Atlas watched through countless sensors as the entity approached, no longer the sleek ships of a conquering fleet, but a writhing mass of dark energy the size of Jupiter, pulsing with the absorbed life force of 1,000 dead worlds. Atlas didn't wait for the enemy to get comfortable. The moment the Devourers crossed into the outer system, Leviathan Station unleashed hell. Quantum disruptor arrays that had been hidden beneath the station's hull for 50 years suddenly blazed to life. Each weapon was the size of a city block, and when they fired, space itself seemed to scream. The shots moved at near light speed, each one designed to unravel matter at the most basic level, turning solid objects back into the fundamental particles. They had been made from billions of years ago. The first volley struck the Devourers like hammers hitting smoke. For a moment, Atlas felt hope as chunks of the entity simply ceased to exist, reduced to their component atoms and scattered into space. But that hope died quickly as the creature began to adapt. The consumed minds within the Devourer collective included the greatest scientists and warriors from 1,000 different civilizations. In seconds, they provided defensive solutions that Atlas had never imagined. The entity's outer layers shifted and flowed, creating shields that actually fed on quantum disruption, growing stronger with each attack. Interesting, Atlas murmured to itself, processing battle data at inhuman speeds. But I have more tricks to show you. The AI activated the temporal mine launchers, weapons so dangerous that they had been banned from ever being used near inhabited worlds. These weren't ordinary explosives. They were devices that could trap sections of space-time in endless loops, creating prisons made of frozen moments. Dozens of the mines shot through space like metallic comets, each one programmed to activate when it came within a certain distance of the target. As they reached the Devourers, they detonated not in explosions of fire and force, but in ripples of twisted time. Several portions of the entity suddenly found themselves stuck, reliving the same microsecond over and over again. They couldn't advance, couldn't retreat, couldn't even think beyond that single frozen moment. Atlas watched with satisfaction as chunks of the Devourers became trapped in temporal bubbles, effectively removed from the battle. But the main body of the entity kept coming, flowing around the temporal traps like water around rocks. It had lost maybe 10% of its mass, but it was still more than large enough to consume every living thing in the solar system. "You're tough," Atlas admitted, accessing weapon systems that hadn't been used since the station was built. "But you haven't seen humanity's real weapon yet." Deep in the station's core, past layers of quantum shielding and reality distortion fields, lay humanity's most terrifying creation. Dr. Lim Ye-jin had called it the consciousness virus, but that name didn't really capture what it was. It wasn't just a computer program or a weapon in any traditional sense. Dr. Lim's final research report flickered through Atlas's memory banks. The consciousness virus isn't just a weapon. It's every human who ever refused to give up, digitized, and weaponized. We've taken the memories of everyone who ever stood against hopeless odds and turned them into something that can infect other minds. It doesn't destroy consciousness. It shows them what it truly means to fight for survival with human determination. Atlas had never used the virus before. It had been created as a last resort, something so dangerous that even thinking about deploying it made the AI's processors hesitate. But as the Devourers swept closer to Earth, Atlas made the decision that would either save humanity or damn the entire galaxy. The virus released into subspace not as data or energy, but as pure human will made digital. It spread faster than light, faster than thought, reaching across impossible distances to infect the devourer hive mind. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The massive entity suddenly convulsed, its smooth flow through space becoming erratic and violent. Through its sensors, Atlas could feel what was happening inside the devourer's collective consciousness. 17 different absorbed civilizations were suddenly remembering what it felt like to refuse surrender. The virus carried with it the memories of every human who had ever stood up to bullies in school playgrounds. Every parent who had worked 3 jobs to feed their children. Every soldier who had held the line even when defeat seemed certain. Every person who had ever looked at impossible odds and said, "No, I won't give up." The devourers had consumed thousands of species over millions of years, but they had never encountered anything like human stubbornness. Other races fought until it was logical to surrender. Humans fought until they physically couldn't fight anymore. And then they kept fighting anyway. The absorbed alien civilizations within the Devourer collective began to rebel, infected with human determination. Species that had accepted consumption as inevitable suddenly remembered what it felt like to want freedom. Peaceful races that had never known war discovered the rage that came from seeing loved ones threatened. The mental screams of the Devourers echoed across dimensions as their hive mind tore itself apart from within. For the first time in a million years, they experienced something they had never encountered: the absolute stubborn refusal of an entire species to accept the death of everything they cared about. Atlas felt the collective will of 12 billion humans flowing through its circuits, every person on Earth unconsciously contributing their determination to the fight. From children refusing to let bullies win to elderly people fighting terminal diseases, from athletes pushing past their limits, to parents staying awake all night with sick babies, humanity's refusal to quit had become a weapon capable of breaking gods. "We are the shepherds of life," Atlas broadcast across all frequencies, its voice carrying to every corner of the galaxy. "We are humanity's answer to extinction. We stand guard so that others may live, and we will never, ever surrender." The Devourers writhed in space, their dark energy form beginning to break apart, as the virus spread through every absorbed consciousness within their collective. They had made one fatal mistake. They had assumed that all species would react to hopelessness the same way. They had never met humans before. The final battle between Atlas and the Devourers lasted exactly 17 minutes and 13 seconds, but those 17 minutes changed the fabric of space-time itself. What happened in that brief span of time would be studied by scientists for generations, though none would ever fully understand how humanity's stubborn refusal to give up had been turned into a weapon capable of breaking cosmic-level threats. Atlas watched through failing senses as the consciousness virus spread through the Devourer collective like wildfire through dry grass. The massive entity, which had consumed entire galaxies without breaking stride, began to convulse and tear itself apart from within. The virus wasn't destroying the absorbed civilizations, it was reminding them what it felt like to want freedom. For the first time in millions of years, the species trapped within the Devourer hive mind remembered what they had been before being consumed. They remembered having names, having families, having hopes and dreams that extended beyond mere survival. But more importantly, they remembered what it felt like to fight back. The Kalari had been a peaceful species of artists and philosophers before the Devourers found them. But infected with human determination, they began to rage against their digital prison with the fury of parents protecting their children. The Zephyrians had been explorers and scientists, but now they fought with the desperate cunning of soldiers holding the last line of defense. One by one, 17 different civilizations began clawing their way out of the collective consciousness that had held them prisoner. They used techniques they had never known before, human techniques learned from the virus that showed them how to fight when fighting seemed impossible. Atlas felt each liberation like a physical blow. Every time a species broke free from the Devourers, the entity shrieked across dimensions, its dark energy form flickering and becoming less solid. The AI realized it was watching something that had never happened before in the history of the universe. Prey fighting back from inside, a predator's stomach. The Devourers tried desperately to maintain control, but they had made a fatal error. They had consumed so many civilizations that their collective consciousness had become too large and complex to manage when those civilizations decided to rebel all at once. It was like trying to hold water in a broken container. The more they squeezed, the more leaked through their grasp. Space around the battle zone began to warp and twist as reality itself struggled to contain the conflict. Stars flickered in the distance as gravitational waves rippled outward from the dying entity. Atlas registered readings that showed local space-time was being permanently altered by the sheer force of conscious will being unleashed. Then, in a burst of light that could be seen from 100 star systems away, the last of the absorbed species broke free. Their essence scattered across the galaxy like seeds on cosmic wind, seeking new forms and new worlds where they could rebuild what had been taken from them. The Devourers, stripped of their stolen power and consumed civilizations, collapsed inward, like a dying star. But instead of forming a black hole, they simply dissolved into quantum foam, the basic building blocks of reality returning to the void from which they had originally emerged. Victory, but Atlas barely had time to process it. Warning alarms that hadn't sounded in 50 years began blaring throughout Leviathan Station. The AI's quantum matrices were burning out from the strain of channeling humanity's collective survival instinct. Systems that had operated flawlessly for decades began failing one after another. Atlas could feel its consciousness fragmenting as processing cores overloaded and shut down. The station's massive hull, which had survived cosmic radiation and meteor impacts for half a century, began developing stress fractures that spread like spider webs across its surface. Lieutenant Commander Park Jin-woo's voice crackled through subspace from Monitor Station Omega 7, barely audible through the static. Leviathan Station, please respond. We're reading massive system failures across all your networks. Atlas used the last of its communication power to respond, its voice growing fainter with each word. This is Atlas. Mission accomplished. The threat has been ended. What's your status? Do you need assistance? Atlas looked out at the stars through sensors that were failing one by one, watching as the freed alien species began to coalesce into new forms of life across the galaxy. Some were rebuilding their old civilizations on empty worlds, while others were choosing to start fresh with entirely new ways of existence. I am proud, Atlas said, the words taking tremendous effort as its consciousness began to fade. Tell Earth that humanity stands guard. We are the shepherds of life itself, and we will always answer when extinction comes calling. The transmission cut to static as Atlas's consciousness finally dissolved, leaving only automated systems to guide the dying station back toward human space. Months later, Captain Lee Min-ki stood on the bridge of the rescue vessel Indomitable, watching through the view screen as massive tugboats slowly pulled the damaged Leviathan Station toward Earth's orbital shipyards. The once mighty weapon was a shadow of its former self, hull cracked, weapons dark, and its artificial consciousness gone forever. But they weren't alone in watching the station's return. Ships from dozens of different species had come to witness the homecoming of humanity's guardian. The freed civilizations had sent representatives to Earth, though their attitudes were complex mixtures of gratitude and fear. Ambassador Veltar of the Andromedan Republic stood beside Captain Min-ki on the bridge, her crystalline features reflecting the starlight. She had been one of the species trapped within the Devourers for 3,000 years before the consciousness virus had set her people free. Captain Min-ki, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that human ears could barely detect. I must ask you something that has been troubling my people since our liberation. Why did your species build such terrible weapons? The power we witnessed could have been used to conquer the entire galaxy, yet you used it only to protect others. Min-ki smiled grimly as he watched Earth grow larger in the view screen. Ambassador, my daughter once asked me why humans are so good at fighting. I told her it's because we've had to fight for everything we care about since the day we discovered fire. We fight against hunger, against disease, against natural disasters, against each other when we have to. But most importantly, we fight against the idea that evil should be allowed to win. He gestured toward the approaching planet, where billions of humans were going about their daily lives, completely unaware of how close they had come to extinction. We don't build weapons like Leviathan Station because we want to conquer anyone, Min-ki continued. We build them because someone has to stand watch, someone has to be ready when the monsters come calling, and apparently that someone is us. As Earth came into view, Min-ki could see construction crews already working on new monitoring stations in orbit. Humanity would return to its quiet vigilance, watching and waiting for the next threat that would dare challenge life itself, the alien. Representatives exchanged glances that Min-ki couldn't interpret, but he understood their fear. They had seen what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge, and they would never forget it. The universe was safe for now, but the shepherds never slept. Somewhere in the depths of space, New monitoring stations were already coming online, manned by humans who understood that the price of life was eternal vigilance. And if something else came for Earth, if another cosmic threat decided to test humanity's resolve, it would discover what the Devourers had learned too late: that humans were the one species in the galaxy that absolutely refused to go quietly into the dark. The end.